It's time for Talk of the Bay on K-Squid. I'm Rachel Ann Goodman, and we have a doozy of a show for you today. Have you ever wondered when you're watching cable news why they're not discussing the costs of the war in Iran, not only in terms of oil prices and gasoline prices, but to the environment? We're going to be talking with two people today who are experts in what's happening in the war and how it connects to our local communities and our quality of life. One of the things that we talk about a lot on this show are renewables, energy, and we'll be talking in the second half to someone from Third Act, Bill McKibben's organization, Michael Richardson, who will talk to us about the connection between the war in Iran and the search to go renewable only, and how that might actually take the pressure off of places like Iran and other particularly fraught parts of the world. In the first half, though, we go a little more local, and we'll be talking with Brady Bradshaw. He's senior campaigner with the Oceans Program for the Center for Biological Diversity, one of the champion organizations doing lawsuits to try to protect the environment in a number of different ways. And this particular topic hits close to home. It's the Sable Pipeline in Santa Barbara, which the Center for Biological Diversity is suing to try to shut down. But let's talk about how we got here, where one of the worst oil spills in the whole history of oil spills in California happened right there at the Sable Pipeline. Brady, what's the history of this story, and why are we in the middle of a lawsuit about it? Because it got turned back on.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel, and it's great to be here. I wish it was under different circumstances, but for the past decade, since 2015, when this horrendous oil spill happened, killing hundreds of marine mammals and birds off the Santa Barbara coast, the community has been fighting to make sure that safety standards are upheld and that this pipeline never restarts, because it was corroded to the extreme, and it ended up spilling oil 30 years into its, the end of its lifespan. So, it sat around for another 10 years, and nobody thought this pipeline could ever be restarted. But when state agencies finally kind of set the boundaries firmly for Sable, they went crying to the Trump administration and said, we need your help to restart this decrepit pipeline. And the Trump administration went to the Department of Justice, and a series of events unfolded that enabled them to attempt to basically preempt state law altogether to restart the pipeline under emergency powers and this fake energy emergency that the president has been ranting about. So we have now a situation where a pipeline is operating that is so extremely corroded that we fear every day for another oil spill.
And here in the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary, we have many endangered species, and the probably most charismatic of them all are the sea otter, which, if there was a spill in Santa Barbara, could potentially be impacted. There's so few of them. There's less than 3,000 existing. And so this could affect us here, and not that we should only be caring about our Monterey Bay. We care about the whole coast of California. We'll be talking about drilling and other threats, but for now, let's stay focused on the pipeline. When did it get turned on? It was pretty recent, right?
Yes, it was right before my birthday.
Happy birthday.
It was early March. The pipeline was, it was a Friday the 13th that they announced the pipeline would receive the Trump signed an emergency executive order, which then went to basically delegate authority to the Secretary of Energy, Chris Wright, who is a fracking executive who is now in the White House. And so he just immediately issued an order to Sable. And the very next day, on the 14th, Sable announced that the pipeline had restarted. So all in very quick order. We definitely suspect some nefarious kind of political interference happening with this project. It was very politically fraught in California, and also it's just an opportunity for Trump to kind of rub it in our faces. And so I don't think that this project was about a national security at all. I think it had more to do with flexing and maybe potentially causing another disaster in California at our expense.
Ecocide. So when you are talking about rubbing our noses in it, that's a very vivid, kind of a metaphor, because no one wants oil on their faces or on their beaches for that matter. And Californians have been very clear about how they feel, regardless of political party. They do not want another oil spill on our beaches because our economies are directly tied to tourism, and our natural resources are what people come here for when they visit. So it's tied to tourism, but it's also tied to other parts of our economy, like the fisheries industry. So we've had very stringent laws. Is this about states' rights, where the federal government's trying to literally run roughshod over our very strong environmental laws here in our state?
Yes, this is actually even more than, when the pipeline spilled in 2015, there was a legal agreement reached as a result of the spill that was they call it the consent decree. And this was a legal agreement establishing that the California State Fire Marshal has exclusive jurisdiction over this pipeline. It's completely within California, with California's jurisdiction. So for Trump to step in, and basically Sable made a determination themselves that said this pipeline is now interstate. And they wrote to the Trump administration and said, please concur with our determination.
Interstate? It's in the state of California. It's very clearly in one state only. Yeah,
the entire length of the pipeline was in question runs from Santa Barbara County to Kern County. And so the claim that it's interstate is completely, again, it's one of those things where we're being totally gaslighted by the administration, and these things are happening so fast that it's kind of hard to keep up with.
Well, we're keeping up with it here on Talk of the Bay. So how much oil is going through this pipeline? Where does it come from, and where is it going?
Unfortunately, there's not a lot of transparency about anything from this company or their production rates. They have announced, they do put out talking points saying how many cars they're going to fill. It's just kind of funny because the whole reason that this national security argument was raised was because there was a claim that it would help send oil to our military. And then there are conflicting claims about, giving these to California refineries and, lowering gas prices, which is also completely false because oil prices are set on a global market. So there's just there's nothing that this company has said that we can actually trust.
And that goes for our federal government, it seems, given the speech that was made last night that pretty much contradicted itself. So, they lie all the time. So I guess these corporations are also taking the same tactic that the government is taking about what's happening with their resource. So where does it go from here? The Center for Biological Diversity is famous for winning environmental lawsuits. Let's give you guys some credit. So many of the kind of landmark cases have been fought and won by you as an organization. Tell us a little bit about how you work, and when you picked this fight, you're fighting the big guys, right? You're fighting the administration and an oil company. The two are in cahoots right now.
Yeah, I would, this fight was initiated when the spill happened, and this is something that obviously the community of Santa Barbara, who we worked closely with at that time to document and to try to prevent another spill in the future. The fact that we're still working on it, and this pipeline should have been decommissioned right after the spill.
But I understand they almost immediately applied for a permit to reopen it before fixing it. And there's 10 different iterations of their attempts to get it back online, and they kept getting denied because there were holes there, it was rusting.
Right. Actually, the companies, Exxon owned these 3 platforms off the coast.
And we know they have a great record of oil spills, right?
Yeah. The Exxon Valdez was a, terribly infamous oil spill in Alaska. Exxon owned 3 platforms that were shut off when the pipeline ruptured. There were 4 more platforms connected to this pipeline. Those platforms went offline, but Exxon seemingly didn't want to decommission and spend the money to remove the platforms. So the first thing that happened was Exxon sought a new pipeline to be constructed, which was, to everyone at the time, the only way that these platforms would ever come back online. That process, seemed like the company was unwilling to undergo the proper environmental review processes, and it just ended up being too costly. So Exxon pursued a emergency trucking route, and the county of Santa Barbara denied that trucking route because they didn't want oil trucks packing their highways and causing accidents and exploding on the highway, which they have done historically. And this trucking proposal proposed to ramp up that oil trucking by a lot. And so all of that was defeated, and I think we all were celebrating at the time because we thought, okay, great, offshore drilling needs to come to an end. These platforms are sitting there rusting in the ocean, and now that there's nowhere to go, it's time for them to shut down, and it's time for us to move on. But years later, out of the woodwork came this brand new company called Sable Offshore Corp that was basically formed and lent the 97% of the purchase price of the platforms and the pipeline. Exxon lent them that money to buy it. So it's very suspicious. And the company started to quickly deploy, work crews in the coastal zone, and they were issued notices of violation of environmental law, cease and desist orders, multiple cease and desist orders from the Coastal Commission, and violated those in the end, and ended up receiving an $18 million fine and 21 criminal charges, including 5 felonies. So this company's been racking up all sorts of sort of bad boy stats over the years, and I think that maybe, that kind of potentially curried favor with the administration, that they wanted to come in here and run roughshod all over California's environmental regulations.
Well, we know they're trying to open our coast to drilling and mining, and that whole fight is still underway. Mm-hmm. Shall we talk about that? Is this connected? Both of these stories sort of seem to have the same impetus to them.
Yes. This is every 5 years, the presidential administration does a thing called the 5-year plan for oil and gas leasing. And under the first Trump administration was the first time we've seen the Pacific Coast included in a proposal to expand offshore oil and gas leasing, which would mean new areas of the ocean leased for additional drilling. In 2018, California passed a law preventing the construction of new state infrastructure to support any new leasing, so that we could essentially block new leasing through state law. And Biden, when he was in office, permanently withdrew the entire Pacific Coast from any future leasing. But Trump came into office and immediately included it illegally and then challenged it in court. So there's multiple levels of this happening. But the main picture is that Trump is trying to open the entire California coast to expanded leasing, new areas, even in marine sanctuaries up here in Santa Cruz and Monterey, would be included in the consideration for new oil rigs to be put in. The real threat that we see right now is that there could be additional leasing adjacent to the areas that currently have infrastructure, like Santa Barbara. But really, all of these threats are real, and we need to take them seriously. And I think lots of people have shown their strong opposition, like we have forever, to offshore drilling. But these things are very much related, because Trump's use of the Defense Production Act and emergency powers is a pretty stark warning for not only California, but for the rest of the nation, that this administration will try to preempt state law and use authoritarian means to pursue fossil fuel expansion.
Right, and we haven't talked about climate change, but the impact of burning all these fossil fuels is going to doom us to a very grim future for the younger generations particularly. And we're going to be talking more about that in the second half of the show, but acting like it's just another resource is completely bonkers, because scientists are warning louder and louder each year that things are accelerating and we need to wean ourselves off of it, not drill, baby, drill. And so there's a grassroots movement here. I understand there's laws they're trying to pass at the county by county level to prevent onshore infrastructure Can you talk a little bit more about that effort and how that dovetails with maybe what your organization is doing?
Yeah, it's a really fantastic approach that I think counties and cities have been using for a very long time to pass ordinances related to that infrastructure I mentioned, like pipelines, processing facilities, things like this, that the county or the city would create additional legal barriers or prohibit completely the operation of these pipelines or facilities in association with offshore drilling. So that's a great effort that Save Our Shores is a local organization that's been really at the helm of this. And it's a really smart strategy. And we also need to be working at the state level. So we're also working with Assemblymember Addis and Assemblymember Hart to introduce bills that would strengthen California state's legal protections to make sure that existing infrastructure can't be used for bringing that oil onshore, and also to strengthen pipeline safety requirements, et cetera, so that if the administration tries to bring this new oil onshore through California's sort of old, decrepit, aging infrastructure, that they would not be able to use the ones that have already spilled 10,000 gallons plus, for example. So all sorts of efforts are happening. People care a lot about this. There's a ton of energy, and we're going to have to keep fighting on every front. The cities, the states, and everyone needs to be very vigilant right now, because these comment periods and the processes are moving way faster than they ever have.
We just finished one, didn't we, about the drilling off the California coast that closed on March 30th?
Yeah, this part gets really confusing for people, because in the past we've had these 2-year processes or more to establish the 5-year plan, but this time they're doing these back-to-back comment periods, and as soon as they end one comment period, they've been restarting another one. So people are getting confused.
That's probably intentional.
Yeah, it's overwhelming. We feel it very clearly, like everyone is overwhelmed. But we have to stay on the ball, and I think this final comment period that's about to come with this 5-year plan piece, which is the expanded leasing piece, this will come, and it will be a 90-day comment period, or it's supposed to be by law. We'll see what happens. But that will be the final step in establishing this plan.
So let's get back to the legal wrangling, because it feels like when you read the headlines, the only place these illegal actions by the Trump administration are checked are in the court system and through judges. And those judges span the political spectrum and who appointed them. It seems like there's a lot of holding the line. Do you hope these cases are going to go all the way up to the Supreme Court, or are there lower courts who might definitively rule on them in our favor, those of us who don't want oil drilling off our coast?
Yeah, fortunately, I think it's safe to say, fortunately, the Supreme Court has a limited scope of what they can take on. They also have limited capacity. So there are plenty of courts that we've even had Trump appointees or folks that have been appointed by Bush rule in our favor, because in a lot of these cases, the actions are so blatantly illegal that we're able to challenge them and win. And so in the Sable case, we have a challenge right now. We actually challenged the California State Fire Marshal early in the process because they issued a state waiver, which has since been brought into question because there had been additional repairs that actually needed to be done on that pipeline before they were allowed to restart. But in that case, we were able to get an injunction against the restart of the pipeline. So Sable is currently violating an injunction. There's also challenges that we have to the lease extensions on this offshore drilling unit and others. We also have an injunction against offshore fracking that's in place. And one of the companies off of Huntington Beach is testing the limits of that injunction and trying to work their way around the injunction by finally pursuing the environmental review processes that would be needed to initiate fracking offshore off of the Pacific coast, which hasn't been done in a very long time because it's essentially been banned.
what we're seeing is like a collusion. It used to be the federal government was where they would protect, us and the environment. And now it's the oil companies and the federal government in cahoots to break the law. And thankfully, organizations like yours and grassroots movements have checked these, but maybe not to the extent we need. Now, are these pipelines such that you could turn a knob? I mean, it's not so simple. But if there's an injunction, doesn't that mean they have to turn it off while these things work themselves out? Or are they trying to break the law and hope that they aren't going to get caught or fined? Or
Yeah, that is how it's supposed to work.
supposed to.
The injunction that we have is going to be brought back up for another hearing. And at that time, we hope that the judge will enforce the injunction, which means that there will be penalties such as contempt of court, which could result in not only fines, but also jail time for Sable executives.
Let's see that. I would love to see actually people who are breaking the law go to jail, especially if they're going to kill our coastline in the process of what they're doing. It's like so often with spills and other damage, they pass on to the consumer, they pass on to the state to clean it up. So where are the polluter pays laws in all of this? Do we have some in California that would come into effect if in the middle of all this wrangling there's another spill, God forbid?
Right. Fortunately, there have been significant fines on these companies in the aftermath of the spills. Hundreds of millions of dollars have been distributed to people affected. Unfortunately, to me, that doesn't solve the problem. What we really need is a phase out right now. And the wildlife impacts you can't put a dollar amount on it.
You can't return a species from extinction. And as we started out talking about, the beautiful California sea otter is our iconic species here in the Monterey Bay. And if there were a big spill in Santa Barbara, who's to say it wouldn't float up here and kill a bunch of them? So we treasure these creatures, but we need help protecting them. Right now it's like a war against the environment, and now they're talking about an extinction committee that's going to decide whether species get to live in the Gulf of Mexico, which is what it's still called as far as I know. But there's this committee, right, that's going to be on what terms deciding, the God Squad, that something will live or die. Some rice whale deserves to have a life as a species. And so these are the stakes that we're talking about. If you just joined me, I'm speaking with Brady Bradshaw. He is with the Center for Biological Diversity. He's the campaign director for the Oceans programs, and we're talking about oil drilling off the California coast, something we never thought we'd see in our lifetimes, because just a few years ago it seemed like it was permanently gone from our worry sphere, but back again. So what are the next steps? And is there a grassroots organization? I'm sure people listening want to get involved to help in whatever way they can. What are like 3 things people could do if they were to feel inspired by this conversation?
Well, I definitely want to give people steps to take. I also want to say California is stepping into the ring big time. The California Attorney General is challenging all of these illegal actions in court, and we are hoping that those result in an injunction. The state parks has demanded that Sable remove their pipeline from the state park, and there will be a hearing on April 24th that should result in a preliminary injunction, in my opinion. And so we just want to celebrate California for being such a strong fighter and, taking the Trump administration to court over all of these things. I think people need to stay tuned with your, Save Our Shores with the Center for Biological Diversity, because we'll be announcing how to submit comments, and there's going to be somewhere around mid-May a mass mobilization that we will have on the beaches, and people can come out and join us. So
not such a long drive from Santa Cruz down to Santa Barbara, so keep us informed about that.
Well, this will be all up and down the coast.
It'll be everywhere.
So,
okay.
In solidarity
We're
with
there.
the
We're
folks
there. We're definitely there because people love their beaches and they love their ocean without oil sitting on the surface or sinking into globs onto the beach. So there was one last thought I was going to leave people with about this story, but one of them is that we haven't paid much attention to the gubernatorial race in California. And from what I hear, because there are so many candidates on the Democratic side, we could have a Republican governor, which would not bear well at all for this conversation. So if people aren't at all tuned into the gubernatorial races, it's time to ask the candidates what they would do in this case. And are they going to defend our state or let it be open for sale? So please do pay attention to these things that seem abstract, but they come right down to whether we'll have a pristine coastline or one gobbed up with oil. So thanks for bringing this conversation, Brady Bradshaw from the Center for Biological Diversity. And in just a moment, we'll be joining Michael Richardson. He is with Third Act, Bill McKibben's organization that's working on several fronts to advance renewables. And we're going to talk about how the war in Iran is connected to the advance or not advance of renewable energy, and why aren't we aggressively talking about renewables in the context of what's happening in the Middle East. But we will, because that's what we do. Coming in just a moment, it's Talk of the Bay. I'm Rachel Ann Goodman. Stay tuned to K-Squid for more.
If you appreciate jazz, then tune into Jazz Tracks every Thursday evening from 7 till 10 p.m. right here on K-Squid.
Join your hosts, Noreen Nolan, Bill Van Bloom, and Charles Perroni as we present thematic musical sets celebrating this unique art form. From classic recordings to new releases, you'll hear a variety of jazz styles.
So join us on Jazz Tracks and enjoy the richness of jazz on KSQD 90.7, 89.7, and 89.5 on your FM dial and on the web at ksqd.org.
Hello, this is Richard Wolf, host of Economic Update here on K-Squid. Join me every Friday morning at 9 for up-to-date economic news and analysis you can't get anywhere else. That's Economic Update with Richard Wolf, Friday at 9 on K-Squid, 89.5, 89.7, and 90.7 FM.
That's what you're tuned to, K-Squid Radio, right here along the California coast, the Monterey Bay area. This is Talk of the Bay. I'm Rachel Ann Goodman. Thanks for tuning in this evening. I really appreciate you listening. And continuing our conversation about fossil fuels, we have joining us all the way from upstate New York, Michael Richardson. He is with Third Act. And if you've ever heard of Bill McKibben, whose latest book is all about solar energy, it's his organization that he started to, well, we'll find out from Michael when we talk to him. Hi, Michael. You are on K-Squid Radio.
Well, hello, Rachel. It's a real pleasure to be with you this evening.
Thank you
well,
so
I
much.
guess it's early evening for you. It's late evening for me.
Yes, it is. We're a 3-hour time difference. So you've seen the sunset. We have yet to see it yet, but we will. And we want to talk about why in the world, when you tune into cable television, which I had the interesting opportunity to do, I don't usually imbibe as much as I had over the last bit, but my host, where I was staying in Hawaii, watched it regularly, watched MSNBC, and then we were clicking around to CNN and Fox just to see whether the coverage of the Iran war ever moved over to talking about how this might not even be happening if we had enough renewables in our world to get rid of that 20% dependency that we're seeing on Middle East oil. So what's your take? Why aren't we hearing enough about it? And we are going to hear about it today on the program.
Well, let me just say that I think it depends on what you're listening for. If you're looking for hindsight, otherwise, had we been on renewables, this would not be happening. We're not hearing so much of that. But if you read the papers today, whether it be The Guardian or Forbes or even a couple days ago, the New York Times, you are hearing about it as far as foresight. That certainly the deeper story here is that it's not that war makes oil more expensive, but that the war is reminding us how vulnerable the fossil fuel system really is.
Absolutely. And we were just talking to Brady Bradshaw about this Sable oil pipeline and how the Trump administration has forced it open under an emergency that's invented for defense. But one of the articles I did read, which I believe was in The Guardian, thank you to The Guardian for good coverage of this topic, said that the countries that have heavily invested in renewable energy are much less vulnerable to the swings in the global oil market, because so many things are tied to the use of oil, including agriculture. We can talk about nitrogen-based, fertilizers and how important they have become to agriculture, especially the main commodities. But we're talking about the countries not being as impacted. Tell us about that dynamic. Like, how does that buffer all these other things that are globalized?
Well, the one country that is being pointed out in those articles is Pakistan. And certainly Pakistan's shifting over to cheap solar energy, or solar systems that are made available from China, is relieving them of that pressure. But as the growing season comes on, it's not going to relieve them from the pressure that comes from the lack of these fertilizers. So there's still going to be a bottleneck there. But let's just look that for years, the climate movement has sold clean energy as a moral imperative. We're very, very clear that if we do not make the rapid transition off of fossil fuels, and what I mean by transition is the transition of the entire world economy. This is an economy that has been based on fossil fuels, that has been based on the principle of setting things on fire, carbon, in order to generate energy. So we've made this moral argument that if we don't move off of fossil fuels to clean energy rapidly, that we're going to be living in a broken planet. But now the discussion is more about the clean energy is simply an economic and geopolitical necessity because it is cheaper. But again, as I started out, the deeper story is not that the war has now made oil more expensive, therefore clean energy cheaper, but we're being reminded about how, as I said, vulnerable the fossil fuel system really is.
I was just at the gas station filling up, in shock because I hadn't filled up since the war began. And this guy next to me was shaking his head, and I just said, "It's bad, isn't it? It's $6.25 a gallon here in California." And he said, "Yeah, there's just really nothing we can do about this, so might as well just get used to it."
Well, Rachel, third act is for individuals over the age of 60, even though we don't check IDs. But if you're in that age range, you might recall 1973. So you could almost say, it's back.
I remember the lines. Before. Well, in case you weren't there, you youngsters, we were in lines for one, and every other day you had a number based on your license plate, and if it was an odd, number, you got to go on Tuesday, Thursday, and if it was an even number. So you can understand it was not just a mild impact of cost, it was also the time spent getting gas was very anxiety producing. People were punching each other out at the gas lines. So it really changed people's attitude after that.
And actually, I was in San Francisco at that time, and there were a good number of young people that were being paid to jockey cars on the gas lines. It was a way to make a few bucks so you could go down to the Fillmore and watch a concert that night.
You could pay someone to jump you in the line. Are you serious?
That's true. That's true.
We don't want to go there. We're not there yet. But boy, when you go to the pump, it's shocking. And so, solar renewables or any renewables, how are they going to change that dynamic? Because we're still driving cars.
And here again, we've been here before. Now, back then, it was OPEC regulating the amount of oil that was being produced, and there were estimates that we were going to run out of oil reserves in a certain number of years. Now, that was later proven to be wrong, and of course, in addition to just getting oil the old-fashioned way of drilling and pumping, we started doing fracking and going after tar sands. But nevertheless, we've been here before, and the lesson was never learned. So let's just look at it this way, that how the system works. Every time that we want to have energy, whether it's for setting it on fire so we can heat something like a gas stove or a gas furnace, or we want to generate electricity, somebody's got to go out and dig this stuff up and transport it to a refinery, refine it, and then transport it to a distribution center, where it be a gas pump or your oil tank at home. And so every time you need that next unit of energy, somebody's got to go get it. So we can kind of look at it this way. There's a pipeline that's coming into your community, into your town. And that pipeline is bringing energy, cubic feet of gas, gallons of oil, kilowatts of electricity. And there's another pipeline that's going out of your community. Now, that pipeline that's coming in is coming in from far away. And that pipeline that's taking the money out is going far away. Imagine that you had an energy system where there were no pipelines, where literally the energy was being generated in your backyard. Call it homegrown. So there's no pipeline bringing the energy in. And because that next unit of energy, wind, solar, hydro, battery storage, that next unit almost costs you zero. Now, you've had costs putting your infrastructure together, but you had costs putting the infrastructure together for those carbon pipelines also, the fossil fuel pipelines. Once the infrastructure is paid for, the next unit of energy is almost zero. And in fact, as far as the local economy goes, most of these energy companies that are providing the solar and the wind and the battery storage are going to pay that community a host agreement and property taxes that actually gives them money. So you're not exporting money. Now, that's a pretty good deal. We talk about our good friend Bill McKibben, who reminds us over and over again that solar and wind with battery storage is the most affordable, the most reliable, and certainly, as far as building out the next unit of energy, the most expeditious. We can put up several gigawatts of solar energy in a matter of months, where if you want to do that same equivalent with a gas-fired power plant or a nuclear power plant, it takes 7, 8, 9, 10 years to do. So that's what we mean by expeditious.
Right. So has Donald Trump, it seems like he's at war with renewables in deference to his funders, the oil industry. But has he been successful in slowing solar, wind, and hydro and other projects?
Well, first of all, their strategy is to just be that, slow down. Everything that I just said is not news to us. Now, certainly, what happened roughly 2-3 years ago is where we crossed this invisible line someplace where renewable energy became cheaper, more reliable, and more expeditious, as I say, than carbon energy or nuclear energy. That's not news to just us. The fossil fuel industry knows this too. And there's one thing, they're scared. They fear this, and that's why they're reacting the way they are. If they didn't, they wouldn't be reacting this way. So they'll do everything possible to slow it down because they have these huge reserves. You know how huge they are now. We were wrong back in 1973. The huge reserves are there, and they have so much money tied up, and that's where all their wealth comes from, by going and getting that next barrel and that next cubic foot so they can put it in the pipeline and sell it to us. Those are all going to become, what do we call them? Stranded assets. And that is just an immense amount of loss of money there, plus there's not going to be more money made. There's going to be an energy system that is literally close to free. As McKibben likes to say, all we have to do is point a sheet of glass at the sun.
And then we have to get through the politics of them hanging on so tightly. Like, can't we just pay them off and say, leave it in the ground, here's your check. It's going to be cheaper than burning it all, which will consign us to a very expensive future where we're pretty much trying to survive and mopping up disaster after disaster, which is almost where we are already. I know that stranded assets are probably worth a lot, but are they worth something just to keep them there? Is there a scenario you can imagine that would enable them to walk away and stop doing this to us?
Well, it's just going to take the economy itself to do it. The strategies that we employ, when I say we, not just the climate movement or environmental movement or Third Act, but the strategies that we have employed in the past, again, we argued around the moral imperative. And even though people understand that if we don't do what we're going to do and do it quickly, that our second and third generations will be living in a broken planet. You read the statistics, people actually believe that there is climate change and they believe it's going to have a negative impact on their grandchildren. But it's not here in the moment. And so we come in and we say, well, okay, then it's not about climate anymore. It's about price. It's about resilience. It's about price stability. It's about affordability, all these things. And that's starting to take some traction. But yet we still have to come down to having a more convincing argument that it's causing this instability. And this is the lesson that's in front of us right now, this instability that's resulting in war. Again, I feel like sometimes I'm a stand-in for Bill, but McKibben likes to say that he can't recall any time in our history where we fought a war over the sun.
That's a great way to think about it. Yeah, you're not going to get people fighting over who gets to put their solar panels up. You do have a situation where you have a president going to bat for these oil companies, thinking that if he actually stymies solar, stymies wind, that they'll have somehow a better competitive advantage as if they don't already have one. So I guess I go back to my question. To your knowledge, he's been somewhat successful in slowing it down? He's talking about paying, and I don't know where the money's coming from, this wind company that was going to put offshore wind throughout the East Coast to not do it and to go drill instead. So he is actively working against these projects on behalf of the oil companies. Is he going to be successful, or is it a blip that we can just write off as a bad nightmare that we're now waking up from?
I don't want to minimize anything about this administration by calling it a blip. It's even more than
a huge pit. It's a giant pit.
I was going to say it's more than a huge speed bump.
A giant oil stain.
Yeah. Oil slick that we go skidding across, right? This whole thing about paying Total Energy to not build a wind farm, and as you say, where's that money coming from? What was it, about $7 billion? But yes, he's slowing it down. We're very clear. Had Kamala Harris been elected president, well, let's go back. Had Al Gore been elected president, but wait a minute, Al Gore was elected president. But anyhow, you get my point. We would not be where we're at today.
Elections matter. They absolutely do. Yeah, we have to remember that.
Be here. I was feeling really comfortable here for a while that certainly that the ability to produce, let's call them green electrons, was becoming so cheap, so reliable, so expeditious that it was literally going to drive the carbon electrons out of business. I was convinced of that. We celebrated what we called Sunday last summer, which was the celebration of the acceleration of solar energy and wind energy. Now, that's been throttled a little bit. We do want to talk about data centers, because that's another monster that's out there other than just this war that's giving us problems with the speed of making this transition of an entire world economy off of carbon and burning things over to green electrons that are generated from the sun and from the wind and from hydro. But Yes, they are slowing things down, Rachel. They're slowing things down so much that it does scare us. Let me just say that I have every reason to believe that we are going to be living maybe a decade from now with an economy that's driven by renewables. But the question is whether or not it will be a broken planet.
And when you say
And
broken
that's what
planet,
scares us.
yeah. So when you say that, you probably have some specific things in mind when you say if we don't go faster, we will be living in a broken planet, and that has a cost too in lives. Everything.
We see it now. The Paris Accord said we need to do this, that, and the other to stay below 1.5 degrees Celsius above the 1990 threshold. And the reality is we're there. In fact, what the Southwest and the Midwest just experienced in the past 2 weeks suggests us that we're beyond there. But the average increase is 1.4, 1.5, depending on how you're measuring it. We are there. And the tipping points in the climate system that was to come from that, they are happening.
I was just in Hawaii, and there were 32 inches of rain that fell in 24 hours. It was a mess. And so, yes, it's happening.
Yeah, we're measuring changes in the currents in the Atlantic Ocean. We're measuring changes in the currents in the polar regions. This causes our jet streams to change. Up here in New England, we had a normal winter, while Billings, Montana, had this unbelievable spring-like weather all the way through their winter. So just the new statistic is that North America was 7 degrees warmer this winter than average. Not the Northeast, but in the rest. But again, back to the fossil fuel industry represented by Trump, because this is basically that big oil has controlled our energy policy and our energy infrastructure for over 100 years. And they're clinging on to everything they can cling on to slow it down as much as they can possibly slow it down. And it is happening. But on the flip side, if there is a silver lining here to this very dark cloud, it is that the renewable energy economy is still becoming cheaper, more reliable, and more expeditious. Look at what China is doing. And literally, there was a period this past summer where they were building out 3 gigawatts of solar energy every day. Now, in New York, we celebrated when we built out 6.2 gigawatts of electricity in 3.5 years. But the technology is there. If you take this moonshot mentality, and it's strange that I would use that metaphor when we just had a moonshot, right? But if you take the moonshot mentality that we had in the 60s and applied it to what we need to do, what China is doing, and you could even add in India and Africa and a lot of Europe, what they are doing, we can get there.
We absolutely have to. There's really no other choice if we want to have a planet that is livable. Let's talk about data centers. We have about 10 more minutes, and we are living right next to Silicon Valley, the place that seems to be driving this frenzy of AI. When you drive up the corridor towards Silicon Valley, all you see are billboards touting its benefits, but you never hear that there's 16 degrees of heating that happens in these heat islands created by the data centers, which on top of climate change is going to make cities hotter when they're hosting these mega farms, and it also is going to be eating up any advances that you're talking about. So how does that play in? Is that a major driver that we're seeing, and how can we get them to reduce the impact of what they're doing if we can?
Well, again, let's go back to, as I started mentioning, how big oil, the billionaires behind big oil have literally controlled our energy policy. And of course, from that, the energy infrastructure for over 100 years. And there's other analogies that we can use or comparisons we can use on how the billionaires have taken over our healthcare policy and also our healthcare infrastructure, hospitals, healthcare delivery, all of it. And now we have where the big tech billionaires are controlling our information policy. This is scary stuff. And also now our information infrastructure. I was saying earlier how I was optimistic how the green electron was going to drive the carbon and nuclear electron just plain out of business. It wasn't going to be economical, and the world would come along with that because that's what they do. But now we have this monster that wants to eat every electron that it can find. It doesn't care if it's green, carbon, or nuclear. It wants to eat that electron. Now, what that does is it just screws up this whole plan, if you will, this whole transition off of fossil fuels to renewables, because our politicians come in and convincingly say we have to have all of the above strategy. We have to have all of these things. We're in favor of renewable energy, but we still have to have our frack gas pipelines, and we have to build all these nukes in order to do this thing. That's the wrap. It gives them the excuse to literally put all that we've been talking about as far as climate change on pause.
We don't really have the time, do we? We don't have time to pause it.
We don't have time. Again, read what you read. We have less than 5 years. Some of us say 3 years. If we're going to make this, it's going to be a broken planet, Rachel. It's just how broken is it going to be, right? And that's where we just don't have the time. And so talk about a pause. Well, the pause that we really need is a pause on climate change. Well, that ain't going to happen. So we need a pause on the building centers. And that's where Sanders and Ocasio-Cortez have proposed the national moratorium. But in many states, where I live here in New York, there's a proposal for a 3-year moratorium on the development of these hyperscale data centers. Now, we're not talking about the cloud. We're talking about the hyperscale data centers, the AI. And so we need these moratoriums at the national level. We need them at the state level. We need them at the local level. Like, we'll take a moratoria wherever we can get it. And Third Act has joined in with Food and Water Watch and the Athena Coalition and the Center for Biological Diversity, and the list goes on, Public Citizen, in a call for these moratoria wherever we can get it. And the reason for this is so that we have the time, the pause, to get it right. Now, I'm not sure what get it right means, but it doesn't mean having massive data centers that are located in one place, demanding an incredible amount of energy, water, land. And as you pointed out quite correctly, creating these thermal heat plazas that is more intense than any urban center that you can imagine.
We have about 4 minutes left, and I wanted to talk about what we all can do. And one of those things would be to pressure our representatives at a local level to do this pause idea. A moratorium is a great campaign to get behind. How would people get in touch with you, or campaigns that they could support? And what other recommendations do you have for actions that people could take that would pressure the right people to do something? Right now, the federal government feels like a lost cause unless you're suing them. But maybe we need to do that too. What else, do you recommend?
Well, yes. First of all, 2 recommendations here. One is, how do we get this pause in the build out of these massive data centers? And then how do we also accelerate the rapid transition over to renewables at the same time? And both of it really requires us going to the local level. We sometimes say trying to do things right now at the federal level, other than getting good people elected in the midterms, is like talking to your shirt. And so we've taken it to the states where we have an audience. New York, we can do this. California, we can do this. Illinois, there are others, Oregon. But the real fight now comes at the local level, at the county and municipal level, depending on how your government is set up. And that's where we can go in and, in the case of the data centers, go for the local moratoria. This is going with the planning boards and the zoning boards saying, do not grant that variance to do that. It's going to the public service commissions and say, do not authorize that interconnection agreement to the grid. We need to go in there and make our voices heard at the local level, because that's where we can stop them right now. Now, we are at Third Act are going to be hosting a series of webinars, many are, along with Food and Water Watch and Public Citizen and Athena Coalition. And one of our first webinars is going to be on the legal strategies that we can do to slow this down. And it might actually even be bringing cases against environmental impact. Did they correctly go through the process that's necessary to build that particular facility on that particular piece of land? But also we're going to be looking at, again, legislative and regulatory approaches, and also corporate campaigns of exposing where these big multinational billionaire tech companies are literally breaking the law in order to leverage the build-out of their systems.
Well, it sounds like something people could get involved with locally, wherever they live, including here in California. Would you like to give out the contact information for Third Act if people wanted to join your efforts?
Well, for Third Act, it's very easy. It's thirdact.org. But I'd also encourage your listeners to get in touch with Food and Water Watch, Public Citizen, and the Athena Coalition.
Fantastic.
All of them have very good information on what you can do, both for building out solar and slowing down these data centers.
Michael Richardson from Third Act, thanks so much for being with us here at Talk of the Bay. It's been really illuminating. Thank you.
Well, thank you for giving us a place where people can hear it.
Absolutely. You have a good evening now.
Thank you, Rachel.
This is Talk of the Bay on K-Squid, KSQD Santa Cruz, and coming up shortly, it's Ask Dr. Don, and before that, it will be First Person Singular. I'll be back with you again next Thursday. Thanks so much for tuning in to Talk of the Bay. This is Community Radio for the Monterey Bay, K-Squid, KSQD Santa Cruz, KSQT Prunedale.